My name is Quan. So in this video, I'm going to break down the BorderlessKit, which is the operating system for global founders. This system is for you if you want to go global and set up a system where you could have an international acceptance of payments, having access to credit cards, having access to credit lines, and then having additional perks like acquiring points and then traveling or doing some other things. Essentially, what you want to do is get access to the most developed financial system in the world, which is the United States-based system. But you can have an advantage over it because if you are based outside of the US, you can essentially set up a transparent entity that allows you to kind of avoid a lot of complexities with the IRS, which is an Internal Revenue Service of the United States, basically a tax man. So I'm trying to do like this video like in a short way, I don't want to spend much of your time, but if you want to learn more, go ahead and to BorderlessKit.com and then kind of submit an application, and we'll see what we can do for you. So this product is still in development, and we're trying to kind of shape it to work with a lot of people and make it a tool, not necessarily a service. So yeah, if you're interested in any of this, please let me know, and then we can get started on it. All right, so the idea here is basically you can have access to credit cards that are denominated in the United States dollar. You could be accepting payments with companies like Stripe, PayPal, and others. You could have access to stable banks, big banks like Bank of America, Chase, or maybe some online banks like startups like Mercury. So what is the competitive advantage here? What are you getting that you cannot get elsewhere, right? What you can get here is basically faster process, and a lot of these things have been worked out already. In terms of cost, like the process is so automated and simplified that there is no need to kind of go and hire a lawyer or a CPA package from an accountant. What you get by doing this approach is basically you can be leveraging your time, right? Because you could be getting 0% credit lines for 6, 12, or maybe sometimes even 18, 20 months, which is essentially interest-free money that you probably cannot get anywhere else, right? And that happens because the sheer size of the U.S. financial system allows you to do it, right? And obviously they have a printer directly from the U.S. Federal Reserve System. So that is like an ultimate advantage that you cannot find in any of the smaller countries, right? Obviously they have like the sovereignty, but when it comes to finance, everything depends on the reserve dollar, reserve currency, which is the dollar, right? So what you also get by this, by doing this, is basically gaining a reputation. Basically, you become a digital American, right? When it comes to doing business transactions, you would have a business issued in the U.S. under the jurisdiction of the U.S. law system. You would have a U.S. address, you would have a U.S. bank account, and you would be charging your clients or your customers via U.S.-based company, right? So essentially, in the eyes of the public, you become a U.S. entity, and that gives you a lot of advantage because whenever you have a website that is like paid to some company in Nigeria, if you're not familiar with Nigeria at all, there would be a more skeptical approach altogether. But obviously, we all transact and use American services, so we have an established trust put into these systems, right? Because we know that the law is much stronger, much more followed through. And then we have this kind of reputation that is applied globally, right? So everyone knows about it and everyone understands it inherently. So we could be taking advantage of that. Obviously, like you have to follow the best practices, you have to follow the law, but still the entire premise is there, right? And a lot of more sophisticated people out there, including like startups or maybe smaller businesses, sometimes bigger businesses, take advantage of this. So what I suggest here is basically you think about it and kind of internalize the concept of becoming a digital American, and then kind of do more research and find out if you're kind of interested in something like that, because it's not a short journey. It takes some time, right? But what it allowed me to do is basically get into the financial system of the United States, and over the 5 years I got my credit line from $500, which was the initial limit that I had on my secured credit cards, to $200,000, and that happened without much input on my end, right? I just had to kind of, from time to time, quarter to quarter, kind of apply for credit line increases. And I've never been a taxpayer in the United States. I've never lived in the United States. I've never had a residence in the United States. So this system is very meritocratic, and it's an honor system. So that gives you a lot of advantage, but you have to be kind of very responsible with the credit lines, etc., right? Because obviously this is a financial instrument and you have to know how to use it. You have to behave in a certain way. You have to always kind of avoid interest payments, which is a very important bit here, right? Because once you stop doing it, like this entire premise breaks down and it's not of any use, essentially. Okay, so the next thing is basically, as I said, right, you'll be gaining a global edge because you'll be charged in US dollars and you will be escaped in local currency. Like basically, if you transact in any other currencies than the top currencies in the world, you experience a huge volatility. You have central banks that are doing some random stuff on top of whatever they already do with the United States dollar, which would allow you to kind of protect your revenue and give you more runway. And obviously you'll be able to build global wealth in a way that is not tied to your current location, right? If you have kind of bigger goals or bigger advantages that you want to kind of follow through in the near future, I think like that's a very smart way to do it, right? Because you'll be getting access to a lot of financial instruments that would allow you to escape whatever limitations you have in your current place of residence. And obviously, unlocking opportunities is that you will be increasing your chances of accessing U.S. venture capital system, right? Networking with people. So having a U.S. entity is almost a must because that gives you a ticket to the big leagues. Obviously, you have to work on it. You have to have some sort of product or service that is that has traction in the Anglosphere or like American market, if you want to kind of go there, right, on a global stage. But that is the system that is out there and it works. So my story is like the following, right? I was born in Kazakhstan, which is like the Central Asian country. I was born in the 90s, so obviously, like in 2025, Kazakhstan is quite a great country. You know, like it is for certain people, right? But the thing is, when I was young, you know, like there were not a lot of opportunities. The world was like super shaky back then because of the Soviet Union collapse, etc. So when I was a child, right, I always dreamed about kind of having access to a system where you'll be treated as a kind of sovereign individual, having access to the law that works for you, and having access to tools and systems that equalize the chances of success, right? So getting into tech or getting into the US allows you to increase chances of that because it's a meritocratic system. A lot of Americans might deny that, but when it comes to the truth, to the ultimate reality check, if you go to Africa or if you go to some Central Asian countries, Eastern Europe, back in early 2000s, or maybe some Asian countries, you experience a lot of nuance, a lot of caveats that stop you from getting ahead. Essentially social mobility isn't there, or if it is there, it comes with a lot of terms and conditions that go against the sovereign nature of an individual. So do keep that in mind. And obviously, Canada has some good options too. But I think kind of starting with the US and then slowly growing around that system would be a really, really good strategy over the long term, intermediate term too. But you got to keep in mind that it's like it does not take 2 days, right? You have to kind of get into it and then kind of slowly have it running in parallel to whatever you have as your main business or kind of hobby or like side project, whatever you have, right? So let me show you what kind of information we want to have from you, right? So basically what we offer here is that you could get a US bank account, identification number, your first credit card. And for now, I would only be providing information, right? I would only be providing guidance as a person who've done this many times. But the idea is over time to have a tool that allows you to kind of input your information and then have service providers come to you and then have a service list or a toolkit almost, where you would be kind of getting into certain things with one click, because you would have all the information pre-filled, right? And we'll be able to kind of help you get further in whatever you pursue as a business owner or as a founder or as a service provider, to get more leverage via 0% interest credit cards, credit lines, having more opportunities to scale your business, having more chances of getting in front of customers or investors. So this is kind of the idea here. which is basically having a toolkit for you to go borderless from wherever you are right now. And a lot of people obviously do that via immigration. But the thing is, in 2025, it's not necessary to necessarily migrate fully. You don't have to become a resident, or you don't have to spend a lot of time in the US right now, right? Because the world has become so intertwined. So you could think of these countries as economy zones, because the entire goal of the country in a capitalistic system is to increase GDP, right? So if you have some sort of idea or concept that could be doing that, or at least having a chance of doing that, the entire system kind of helps you to go and do that, right? So keep that in mind, and then I suggest you go to BorderlessKit.com and kind of get acquainted with whatever we have on that website to kind of become more more informed about it. If you want to learn more before submitting an application, just like go ahead to ChatGPT, Claude, or some other LLM and just kind of try to learn more about it. If it is helpful to your particular situation, if it is, go ahead and submit this application. And then I'm going to reach out to you, and then we have this kind of talk, right, where we can figure out if it is indeed something that can be useful to you in the short term and the long term. What we need from you is basically basic information like email, full name, citizenship, if you already have a US visa, and the budget that you're working with, the situation that you currently have. And yeah, that is basically it. If you are like a tiny business owner, like just starting out like a freelancer, this could be of use to you too, right? Because that is exactly how I started out. And that is one of the leverage that you could be using to get in ahead, especially if you're a young person. I think this is like really, really worthwhile, because to this day and age, like if you cannot accomplish this in Europe, you cannot accomplish this in Central Asia, you cannot accomplish this in Africa, not in South America. So it's just not it, As a very kind of like bright example of this, right? Being a resident in Canada for a few years, like being a taxpayer, just gave me like very, very small credit lines. I'm talking about like $15,000 Canadian, which is basically $10,000 US. While the US system, as I mentioned earlier, provided me with over $200,000 in USD, right? So that comparison allows you to understand, right? Despite Canada being a G7 country with, the top 10 economy in the world, the financial system itself does not tolerate risk that much, while the American system does. And that is the entire premise of the American dream, right? We give you a chance to risk, and you have a chance of capitalizing on that risk. So I think that is it pretty much. If you have any questions, drop them below or reach out to me. You can find my information in the description. And hopefully this was useful or enlightening to you. So, all right, peace out.